Well, welcome, Dr. Jill. I am so excited to have you back on the show. You've been here once and now you're back with us again, and I'm thrilled.
I'm so happy that you invited me back. I'm excited to talk.
This is perfect time because graduation is here. Our seniors are graduating, and many of them are going on to college. And you have your third edition of this fantastic book, which I'm holding it up for those of you can see, and our listeners cannot. So we're going to tell them what to look for because this is the third edition, but it's the Ultimate College Student Health Handbook, your guide for everything from hangovers to homesickness, 240 award-winning tips, tricks, and hacks. And it has won the International Book Awards. It's the winner. So congratulations for this latest edition.
Thank you. I'm really excited. I made a lot of important updates.
And we're going to be talking about those. And I just want our listeners and our viewers to know this one is blue and gold.
Yes.
And so you want, because this is new, you want to get the blue and gold one because there are so many new updates. What's different about this? What made you decide to do a third edition?
Honestly, it was from feedback that I had from both parents and students. There were a few things missing. And the truth is, with the very first edition, I had a list of 100 topics, and the publisher made me cut it down to 50. So I could do 10 more editions and keep putting in more things. But specifically in this one of the most important things is something that we put in as kind of a, not a preface exactly, but as the initial chapter of this one is know before you go. What do college students actually need to know before they ever set foot in the doctor's office by themselves for the first time?
I love that. You and I talked about it because when I went off to college, I did not know what questions to ask and
Yes.
even how to describe my symptoms. So let's start there. Like, how do you share with your kid how to talk to the doctor?
Okay, so I'm gonna do a little prequel to that by saying something I'm sure I probably said last time, but parents, please make sure that your student has a picture of their health insurance card front and back, favorited on their own phone. That way they've always got that with them, because I'll tell you what happens is kids go off to college or to a job or to the military or whatever. And the first thing, whenever they go in, when they've had an injury or illness, and they're, they're not in a good place if they're going in to be seen usually because they're hurting or ill. And the thing that pushes them over the edge is that the receptionist is like, I need your insurance card. And they're like, they can't find it. And it's, maybe it's 2 a.m. and they don't want to call you or whatever. But anyway, so that's an easy thing. Make sure that they've got a picture of their health insurance card front and back. So then talking to the doctor, there's two things. There's something to start with and there's something to end with. The really key thing is that you want to lead with why you're really there. A lot of young adults, a lot of old adults have, they're anxious or nervous about the real thing they want to talk to the doctor about. And so what happens is you call in, say a student calls in and they say they've got stomach pain. Okay, they're put in this 15-minute slot, right, for stomach pain, maybe a 10-minute slot. And they wait until the 14th minute to say, I had one other question. And what I really want to know is I'm having just terrible test anxiety, which is probably the reason for their stomach ache. It's not that they don't also have a stomach ache, but usually that last minute question is something that we doctors can't answer quickly. And so then you either get a rushed answer, which is inadequate, or they ask you to make another appointment, which you don't want to do, or you just don't feel heard at all. And they're like, well, we'll address that next time or whatever. And then you didn't get your answer. So and this happens, of course, with things that are of a sensitive nature. Perhaps if you think you've got a lump or bump, maybe somewhere in the swimsuit region that you're not sure what that is. Sometimes people will be afraid to ask about that, or they'll be They don't want to say that they're just that they haven't slept in a week, and that they're really, really anxious. They'll talk about a headache, they'll talk about fatigue. But anyway, so lead with what your real problem is. And if at all possible, do that when you actually make the appointment. Now that it's online and you're typing it, that does help a little bit, but still, especially if it's something in the sexual nature, people don't want to list that. So number one is start with why you're really there. Number two is finish with 2 words. What's next? It's so important. Probably the most phone calls and text and messages that I get are from people who say, well, they've got X, Y, or Z problem, whether it's I went to the doctor and I got an antibiotic, but I still have a cough, or I went to the doctor and had a sore knee and they didn't do an X-ray and my knee still hurts. And whatever it is, whether it's therapy or an antibiotic or whatever, I say, well, what did they say when you got back with them? And the answer is always like, oh, well, I didn't go back. If they didn't, if they weren't smart enough to figure it out the first time, I wasn't going to go back. Or just young people are like, well, I've already been. I mean, if they were going to give me something else for a cough, they would have already done it. Like, no. So you have to say, what's next? What happens if I don't get better? How soon should I get better? What side effects should I expect? Is there anything that I need to watch out for that would mean I'm getting worse that I might not realize? And understand that doctors they're just telling you their plan A. They've got plan B, C, D, E, and F that they probably are not going to take the time or don't have the time to go over all those backup plans, but they know it. You just need to ask. So, and also ask how you're supposed to get back in touch, because if this is Friday afternoon at 4:30 and you're there with an illness, well, what happens if you get 102 fever or shaking chills, or you can't stop throwing up tomorrow on Saturday or in the middle of the night tonight? Do you go to the ER? Do you text back? So what's next? So lead with what's important, end with what's next.
I love that. Yeah, it's so intimidating at that age it can be at any age when you go to a doctor and you see them as the authority. And a lot of times I'll even get home and be like, okay, now what am I supposed to do?
Right.
You're like, just in that, I don't know, anxious state. And so I love that. What's next? And that's easy to say.
Right.
Next.
What's next?
2, 3 words. So, so yeah, very helpful. And to be able to coach them with that.
Yes.
And I love this book because I think one of the scariest things for us as parents is it requires letting go and safety and knowing our kids are okay. And if they're on medication, that comes up all the time with moms that I work with, like, how do I get my kid to fill their prescription or to remember to take their medication? And we get worried, like, how do we know they're going to be okay? And this book just answers so many of those questions. So let's back up.
All right.
Vacation. What should they do? If they have a prescription, how do you handle that?
Or did you say for vacation?
No, a prescription.
Prescription.
Like,
I'm sorry.
yeah. How do you handle it if they have a prescription?
Okay. So if your child, especially if they're moving to another state, but basically if they're moving out of town, they are probably going to need to get a local doctor. It sort of depends what it is. Like if they're on asthma medicine, so asthma inhalers, or even antidepressants, they may be able to, if it's something where you're not following up every month, but you're following up every 3 months or maybe every 6 months, then they can stay with their current doctor most likely. The big issue comes up with ADHD medications. Yeah. That's the bottom line. Because those are only prescribed 1 month at a time, and you really shouldn't be mailing them. You shouldn't mail them, and they should be getting a prescription ideally from where, the town that they're in. Now, some colleges actually have, it's the minority of colleges that have university health center doctors who prescribe the ADHD medications. Unfortunately, partly because of abuse and partly just because of lack of money and staffing, most places do not have that. So you'll need to find that in the community. And you definitely can ask at the health center, hey, what doctors in the community do students usually use for their ADHD prescription?
Okay.
And the health centers will definitely have a list for you. In some communities, it's pediatricians, which really I mean, I'm a family physician, but most pediatricians stop at 18, some continuing caring for them through college. It's a gray zone, but anyway, it can either be a pediatrician, family physician, or a neurologist in Austin, Texas, or psychiatrist. We more of our neurologists and psychiatrists prescribe them than primary care physicians in my town, but it varies by town. So those have to be refilled once a month. And parents, let me just say,
I know.
I am the parent. I am this parent. It's called attention deficit. And the reality is, odds are really high your kid is going to run out of medication, and probably right before a test. And it'll be, they run out on a Friday and they're not going to be able to get a refill over the weekend. And then we've had the shortage of the ADHD medications. So it's a natural consequences, very frustrating kind of thing, but it happens a lot. And all I can tell you is that you can talk with your young adult about making sure that they've got a reminder system. We always encourage them, you refill that ADHD prescription the day that you can, even if you still have some left over because you forgot to take them, which also happens a lot. Still refill it, because that way you sort of start, creating a little stash for yourself as a backup. So if you do screw up in the future, you may have a few days of your extras off to the side. And the other thing, parents, is these pills do disappear. They are sold for $5 to $10 per pill, and so your kid does need to have a locked box to keep these prescriptions in, so that they don't walk away.
And you could just buy that at like a Target or
Office Max.
Yeah.
I think that's where I've usually ended up buying them for our kids. It's a good idea anyway, especially, that they're going to have a few documents, maybe their passport or whatever. It's good to have at least a small locked box. Not that somebody couldn't scoop that up and walk away with the whole thing, but just every step makes it less likely. So anyways, and make sure that your kid knows how, not only just knows how, make sure this summer, let's let them make their own doctor appointment. And keep in mind, everyone's like, oh, they don't really need to go. Oh yeah, they do. They probably need at least one immunization. They check on their tetanus shot when their last one was. They need to see if they need a meningitis shot. They need to go to the dermatologist or the allergist or the dentist for sure. Make sure they go to a dentist. That is something that frequently falls by the wayside. And then the first semester is a very fertile time for cavities. But have them make their own appointment, help them walk through the paperwork, which is of course now all online, but so that they understand all of that. And I've got that outlined in this first chapter of the book, what's a guarantor, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. And then have them, go by themselves and get the prescription. The doctor will send it electronically now, for most things, and have them go to the pharmacy and pick it up, because it's just most kids have not ever done that because we're so used to doing that. When they're little, we have to, and then you just don't ever kind of go out of the habit of that if you haven't made it a point to have them start taking over their own healthcare.
Yes, have them practice before they go. I think
Yes.
that's really important. What about, this is a very random question, but Amazon now will send prescriptions. Is that something that's helpful when it comes to college students where they have a pharmacy now, or no?
I have not used Amazon for any kind of prescription. So I'm not fully sure what you're saying. I mean, certainly like CVS and Walgreens and the different grocery stores, they all have delivery services where you can have your prescription delivered to you. But by the way, it's really great to pick CVS or Walgreens or one of these pharmacies that is nationwide. Makes it so much simpler because then when they're home, they can still get their prescriptions and the whole back and forth thing. It's all in one system. So I generally recommend using one of
That's good.
those.
Okay. Yeah, that's good to know. I have to chuckle. I was one of those parents too, where my kid was waiting to the last minute and didn't have it. And can you rush me some? Can you mail it? Can you get it to me? And just to
Yeah.
know, it is natural consequences. They're learning to be independent. But if you can help them to figure out some way to set their calendar reminder, just some of those things that they can do to be more aware and
Yes.
to kind of training them to become independent and on their own. But it's very scary. Like I remember that anxiety, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard. And and the response I get from kids all the time, not just my own, but is that I have attention deficit. Of course I forgot this. You're like, yeah, but okay, now we need to move from that to you have this, so you need to have better backup systems in place than the average person. So,
Mhm.
what are those, and have more than one backup?
Yeah.
And there's all different kinds of visual reminders and yeah, it's a challenge.
Yes. Yes. Good. Very, very helpful because I know a lot of moms are like, oh yeah, and how often do I remind my kid? Like, you need to get your medication. That's another one. And just helping.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And yeah, I went through phases where I would just be like, stop reminding her. Because every time, like if she expects me to remind her, and we had this conversation, like if she knows I'm going to keep nagging her until she gets it, then she doesn't have to take on that responsibility. So that was really hard for me because I'm like, well, there's consequences. What if she doesn't do well and then she loses her scholarship? Then there's financial consequences. And it's parents, believe me, I'm right there with you. We've all had those different challenges, but it is really important to try not to over parent that so that they can start getting their own backup systems. And I will say my youngest is now 25 and she's got it 98% of the time.
That is good.
Like
I can
me,
hear that.
not unlike me.
Yeah, I can say the same thing. Just know, but if they know that we're always there to remind them and nag them, they don't have to take it on because that's in the back of their
Right.
mind. Well, mom will just remind me.
Yeah.
And then they
And
get mad that you're reminding them.
yes, it's a
So,
lose-lose.
yes, yes. So you have all of these tips and tricks and hacks, and I just have to say, I love it's so fun the way that you formatted the book and the common issues and that come up for our kids' health issues. So let's go through a few of them
All
that
right.
are most common. And I wrote it down. So one big one, and all of my kids went through this, insomnia, dorm
Yeah.
room insomnia.
Huge issue. The biggest issue in the, that combined with loneliness, biggest issue in the first month. And of course, loneliness and homesickness can cause insomnia. But listen, parents, dorm rooms are literally designed to make you not sleep. I mean, you think about it. They're loud, smelly, bright, all hot. They are all the things that disturb our sleep. So being as proactive as possible, you want to make sure that your kid knows the things that optimize sleep. So you can't make the dorm dark, but you can make your eyes dark. So I'm a fan of the sleep masks. And yes, guys use these too. This is not just a princess pink, little frilly mask. I mean, guys use them all the time. So Sleep masks, ideally get two because they get gross because they forget to put them in the wash. And there's, they put them on, they're sweaty and, then that makes their acne worse. So just get two. They're inexpensive. Don't get the $2 ones. Go it's like a fine wine, go mid-range, like just get like the $8 one or something. Somewhere between $5 and $12, you should get a neoprene-ish one that can be thrown in the wash with their laundry. So that makes it dark. Make sure that they have a fan, a little personal fan. And of course, this depends on what area in the country you are, but even if you're using it for white noise, it is good to have a fan, and most dorms are not cool enough. So people like to have that. Smell, aromatherapy. You cannot have a super flowery, smelly thing. You can't have candles, but you can take away bad odor by just having the gel odor absorbers. This does tend to be worse in guy dorms than girls. I think guys sweat a little more and shower a little less. So putting that in, like with their smelly shoes next to their laundry, that can help a little bit with smell. Or you can get a lot of not to be sexist, but more girls than guys tend to do this. They'll get the little essential oils, lavender or eucalyptus, and just put a drop on their pillowcase. And they'll smell that. So you make it dark, you make it cool. You want to minimize noise. The best thing really that I recommend, you don't want to fall asleep in noise canceling AirPods. That's not good for your ears to have those in all the time. You're going to end up with a wax buildup, and then that's going to be its own separate problem. But they make Amazon sells these sweatbands. It looks like a sweatband, but it goes over your ears. And it's Bluetooth noise canceling. I mean, these are not super high end and they're not expensive. I think they're in like the $20 range, but they're good enough that you can listen to guided meditations or sleep stories, which is what most young people prefer to guided meditation. And for parents who haven't heard of that, it's like stories kind of read in a monotone voice. It's a thing.
Oh, yeah. You're out like a light. I use them.
Oh, okay. There you go. There you go.
I don't know what they do. I guess it's the monotone voices, but yeah, it works. And it takes your mind off of what you're worried about.
Right. See, and they don't do it for me. My daughters love them. I do not, but everyone has to find out what works for them. But anyway, you can do guided meditation or the sleep story or music or whatever. But with those headbands, it's not going inside your ear, but it is canceling the noises around you. And again, you've got your mask on. So if your roommate's coming in and out, it's still dark and quiet for you because you've got that little barrier. But the biggest thing that students do wrong in trying to correct their sleep is this. You need to get up at roughly the same time every day. And that's hard. If you have an 8 o'clock class, which almost nobody does anymore, but if you're a pre-med major and you have no choice because you have the labs or you're an engineer, the same. Anyone who has labs that take up 3-hour chunks, you end up having to have morning classes. So if you have that on Monday, Wednesday, unfortunately, you really need to get up within about the same hour the rest of the week. And if you get up at the same day, it's fine if you take a nap in the afternoon, but you're better off getting up at the same time every day. Than that's more important than focusing on when you go to sleep at the same time. So we have to get them to get on that cycle. And also a lot of kids for social reasons who may not have ever even drank coffee before college, that becomes a very common afternoon, the Starbucks or whatever your cute little on-campus coffee place is. That's an expensive habit too, but that becomes a very common social habit. And so people don't realize that they're having a coffee at 3 in the afternoon, and that is going to screw up your quality of sleep, even if you're going to bed at midnight. So, teach them to be aware of that. And weighted blankets. I love weighted blankets. People are hit or miss on them. For a smaller person, you want a 15-pound one. For a bigger person, I'm just going to say, over 180 pounds, I would get the 20-pound one. And it's sort of like somebody hugging you. It can, some people like it just to sit in before they go to sleep, and other people like to sleep in it. And but those things I think can be worth their weight in gold.
Wonderful. Great tips. Okay. Seizures. That's a biggie in your book. You talk about that. I did not realize that those are common.
Yeah, so seizures are actually they're far more common than people realize. Here in the United States, 1 in 26 people during their lifetime will have a seizure. You think about, way more than 26 people, right? A bunch of people that have had a seizure, I promise. And around the world, it's 1 in 11, but that's primarily because of infectious diseases and parasites that can actually cause seizures. But the real thing is in college age are much more likely to have seizures than other ages. And there's a variety of reasons for that. But let me go over triggers for seizures, and it'll become very clear to you why college students are more at risk. Let's start with sleep deprivation, which we were just talking about, because they live chronically sleep deprived, and stress. Also, alcohol, of course, medications like ADHD medications, and then street drugs like amphetamines, similar, certainly cocaine, ecstasy, synthetic THC, cannabis products. Those can all put you at risk for seizures. Antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications do slightly increase your risk for seizures. Head injuries, again, we see a lot of head injuries in college, often coupled with alcohol. And let's see what else. Benadryl. Benadryl gets abused actually for its hallucinogenic potential, which many parents don't realize. Some students will try and use it for insomnia. That's not actually recommended. Honestly, I've seen people use it very effectively for 2 or 3 nights, and that's fine. It actually loses its sedation if you use it routinely anyway. But the bigger problem was when people start taking bigger and bigger doses of Benadryl. But here's what I want parents to know. What we see in college with seizures, they are provoked seizures, and meaning that we can usually identify a trigger. And it's not 1, it's not 2, it's usually that 3rd layer or 4th layer of adding something on. So you've got a sleep deprived kid who drinks alcohol because they're in college and they're drinking alcohol, but they're also on an antidepressant, and then maybe they've got a cold or they had insomnia and they took Benadryl. So it's like you took someone who had no risk factors and you just like put them all together. And it's when that happens, and then we see seizures. And we definitely do see seizures from drugs of abuse, drugs that are abused, street drugs, cocaine, et cetera, as well. And here's something that people, because there's 2 different things I want to talk about with seizures. One, let's talk about first, what do you do if you see someone having a seizure? Because again, it's more common in college. So odds are good your child is going to end up seeing someone have a seizure. So what do? One, first thing they do is take a breath. It is scary. It's scarier for people watching a seizure typically than it is for the person who had the seizure, because in the moment that they are unconscious, obviously they're unconscious. It's embarrassing and it's scary when they wake up, but it's also scary to witness. What I ask them to do is immediately start their stopwatch. I don't know any college student that doesn't have either an Apple Watch or a smartphone, and they all know how to start their stopwatch. So do that, because it is really helpful for the EMS to know how long the seizure has been going on. And that takes literally 1 second. So do that as you're walking over. When you get to the person, if they're not all the way to the ground, ease them to the ground, because maybe they were sitting in a chair at the library and that was where they had their seizure. So you're going to just ease them to the ground. And all you're doing is making sure they don't get hurt worse during their seizure. So you're just protecting their head. If you've got a jacket, sure, whip your jacket off, put that underneath their head. If you can roll them onto their side, great. I don't overly emphasize that. There's always a chance that they can throw up and aspirate, and that's why you would put them on their side, just like you would if someone were drunk. But the main thing is you're just protecting them from harm. So if they're near something with sharp edges, protect them from that either with a coat or by moving them slightly. And you're timing it. And so when it stops, you check, and so that you can give an accurate thing. Meanwhile, you've told somebody else to call 911. That's the thing. You don't have to do everything yourself. It is rare that you're the only person. If you are the only person, start your stopwatch, call 911 as you're, and put your phone down, put it on speaker as you're using your hands to protect the person. But most of the time, these happen in crowds. They happen walking across campus. They happen at parties. Oftentimes people are already lying down, they're on a couch, so they're sitting down. But again, you're protecting them, you're seeing how long the seizure lasts, and you're calling 911 because there are people that can die from a seizure. It's not super common. There's actually a term for it. It's SUDEP, SUDEP, sudden unexplained death from epilepsy. And it's someone has a prolonged seizure, they go into status epilepticus is the medical word for it. And they just either have repeated seizures back to back to back to back, or just one long continuous seizure. And at that point, it can be dangerous. The vast majority of seizures are scary to watch, but it's kind of over and done in less than 2 minutes, most less than 1 minute. It will not feel like 1 minute when you are watching someone have a seizure. You're going to think it was going on for 10 minutes if you weren't timing it. I promise you. It's an impressive thing to see outside of a controlled area like a hospital. So, so it's really good that people know about that. So I think that's everything about the seizure itself. Then that person is going to be taken to the hospital and evaluated unless they have a known history of seizures. Even then they may be taken. But something that college students don't realize when they're binge drinking and doing the things that can lead to provoked seizures is that if you have a seizure and of course then you're seen, some states have mandatory reporting of seizures. Most it's voluntary, but the whole thing is if you have a seizure, you really shouldn't drive for 3 to 6 months. Up to 18 months. This is state by state by state on those regulations. And not being able to drive when you have a job or you live off campus can really be challenging. So that is, it's just a good thing for young people to know. And again, the biggest thing is that they need to know it's that tipping point. It's if you're on an antidepressant, you can maybe have a glass or two of alcohol, but you really can't binge drink. You are going to have a bad outcome of some sort. And you got to avoid that layering of multiple risk factors.
I always learn so much when I talk to you and listen to you on social media and with your book, because I didn't know really what to do if somebody was having a seizure, and it's just very helpful. And for our kids to know, because that wouldn't be something that would dawn on me, that knowing what you mix, like if Benadryl, alcohol, you're on ADHD medicine, like all these things,
Right.
did you know that there's real danger involved?
Yeah,
And
that's the biggest thing when people ask about, well, what are some of the risks of binge drinking? I mean, just alcohol alone, you can have seizures just from blood alcohol toxicity. But really what we see is it's when those things get combined, and you got to be careful.
yeah, very, very helpful. Nicotine pouches. So we had the whole vaping. So that's maybe separate. Is that separate from nicotine pouches? Is it more the chewing tobacco with the nicotine pouches?
No. So there's this new thing called Zyn, ZYN, and there's influencers, adults, grown-ups that are pushing this stuff. And it is a big trend in middle school and high school as much as college, probably even more so than college. And the selling point, if you will, is that it's nicotine, it's not tobacco. So, the kids all know smoking is bad. But, they know that that's a health risk, but they're being sold that nicotine is just like this great brain stimulant, which it is. It is great brain stimulant. It's also like the most addictive substance. It's just so we've spent decades getting people to understand how addictive nicotine is in its different forms. And now there's these little pouches, and it just looks like I mean, it's literally just like a little clear pouch with white powder stuff in it. And you know, you put it in your mouth between your, you know, it's like dipping, but it's spitless. Although actually it still generates some saliva and people do still spit, but it's supposed to be spitless. But the thing is about nicotine is that the first time you use it, it works great. This is the problem with all drugs that are addictive. It's not that they don't do anything. They do. They wouldn't be addictive if they didn't do something. But what people don't realize is that you're going to spend the rest of your life chasing that initial buzz that you got, whether it's, you know, because it's going to take more and more of the same substance to get that. And then, especially with nicotine, because it's so short acting. So you get this burst of, okay, alert, you're feeling alert and focused and a little bit euphoric. But then it quickly fades. And very quickly with use, suddenly now you're not just craving the feeling good, you're feeling bad from withdrawal, and you can't get to normal. You can't get back to just your normal baseline without that same substance. And that's why it's, you know, that's why it's so addictive. I heard a young man referred to it as the devil's pacifier. And I'm like, you know what? I think that's a pretty accurate description. I really, very anti-nicotine.
Yeah, that's such a good way to describe it, the devil's pacifier. And then you think it's going to make you feel better, but then it ends up making you feel worse and worse.
Right. Because initially it does make you feel better, but very, very quickly, I mean, I'm talking with very little use, just a few times, you're
In that cycle.
you know, you're in that bad cycle, and and then it's just so hard to break. It's very, if someone out there is listening and they are addicted to nicotine, please talk with your doctor. We have so many different ways to help people with nicotine addiction. But we've kind of stopped talking about it, you know, as smoking rates went down, but now another, it's just a new nicotine delivery system.
There's so many now. We have no smoking in restaurants and all these places. And now to think, yeah, it's coming to us. It's just packaged differently.
Yep.
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 So sex and disease, and you have a big, you know, a lot to say about that, which I think is very important. We want to go, no, 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 not talk about that, but it's important to talk about. So what would you say? What would you say about that?
You bring this up in the 11th hour. So so I actually say in this book, I have literally written 3 other books on just sexually transmittable infections, and ended up talking about that for a decade, which was never my intent. It's important. It just, you know, it's not something great for dinner conversation all the time. But anyway, the main thing is you can't tell by looking if someone has a sexually transmittable infection or not. They are very common. The most common is herpes, and it can be passed from someone's mouth, from a cold sore, to someone else's genitals. And we see this all the time. And we can treat it. It is not, you know, this is not a death sentence, but to people's self-esteem, to young people when they are diagnosed with genital herpes or herpes in their mouth, that it goes both ways, by the way, and they start having all these cold sore outbreaks, they feel very bad about themselves. So number one, you know, these viruses don't care how much money you have or how beautiful you are. You know, everybody has them. It's common, 1 in 5 Americans. And use a barrier. If you're going to be intimate with somebody and have your mouth on someone else's genitals, there needs to be a physical barrier there. That's why flavored condoms were invented. And usually that's kind of an aha moment. People are like, oh, never thought about using it with that. So that's important. And, you know, hookups, this is not any kind of moral judgment one way or another, but, you know, a lot of times young people want to hear me say that hookups are not risky, but the reality is the more people you're intimate with, the higher your risk of getting a disease. Get tested, use barriers. It's going to decrease your risk. Thank goodness we have the Gardasil vaccine. Oh my gosh, it used to be, we saw genital warts. I mean, there were over 1 million cases every single year. I don't even know what the current count is, but it's got to be way down. I mean, it's been years since I've even treated anybody for that. It's so great. That's thanks to that vaccine. So, but and young women are fertile. You really need 2 methods of birth control. And I would say 1 barrier plus something else, the pill or the implant, different things. But
What is also great about your book is you can give this to your senior and they will want to read it because you make it so fascinating to read and it's under each topic. So, they're going to want to read that. That's where I'm like, well, that's probably one of the big ones, sexually transmitted infections. Yes, it happens to people like you that they're going to want to read it. And it's like a third party influence telling them these things. A lot of times they don't want to listen to us.
yeah, I can't tell you how many parents have told me that they get several crisp $20 bills and they put them in the chapters they want their kid to read, and then they just set it out.
Oh, I love that.
Just set it out and see what happens. To me, I never intended it to be a sit down and read book. I intended it to be I'm concerned about this. Or as after they read one thing, they might be like, oh, hey, wait a minute, what's this thing about pierced ears, earring infections, or just like it catches their eye. And some kids do read it cover to cover before they go to college. That's definitely the exception, not the rule. But it's good to know what's in there. And my main thing is that I do know a thing or more than Dr. Google. And if you look up a lot of things, it's just going to tell you that you're going to have a brain tumor and die if you have a headache, because they have to go immediately to the extreme. And I try and just keep it real that, like, here's the most common thing. Here's when you need to get help. Here's the worst thing that can happen if you don't get help. And just say it like it is. No judgment.
Yeah, I like that too. Like, when do I go get, what do I need to pay attention to that I know I need to go get help? It's very important. Yeah. So I know we're at time. We didn't even talk about weed. Do you, can you just say something and you'll have to get her book. You have to get her book. But quickly, can you comment about weed?
Yes, parents, short version, today's weed is not your pot, whether you used it or you knew others that did. The THC concentration today, which is the active component that causes the high and the hallucinations and such, it used to be 3 to 5%. Now it's routinely 15%, up to 30%. And then kids take it from there and get concentrated products that are called dab or oils or shatter. And these things actually have like 95 up to 99% THC. It's not the same product. Today's weed is addictive. It's not addictive for everybody, but 1 in 6 teens, 1 in 11 adults, which means if you try and tell someone this, they're like, oh yeah, well, I've used it and I don't have any problem walking away. Yeah, because 5 out of 6 don't, but you don't know if you're going to be the 1 out of 16 that gets completely addicted or the 1 out of 11 adults. And whether you're addicted or not, you can have a bad experience on a given usage, and it can be the exact same. It can be from a legal dispensary, but one time you use this product and you have a lovely experience, and another time you have a very bad experience. And the bad trips are basically you're having delusions, you're paranoid, you think someone's chasing you, trying to kill you. It's very terrifying. And those cars that you see occasionally racing down the street when you're driving, I would bet you 9 times out of 10 today, if it's just a crazy, way out of proportion, high speed car, I would bet you that is a cannabis issue. That's what we've seen in the States, as it's been legalized. They've seen an increase in the number of these high speed chases. And it's because they think they're being chased. I mean, they're They're not out there like, oh, hey, this is just fun. They're fleeing from the CIA with machine guns trying to kill them. That's what they're experiencing in their head. And it's very, very scary. And then they can hurt themselves and others in the process.
Oh,
So,
yeah. And I mean, and I know that is a true thing because moms I've worked with, their kids have had a
mhm.
psychotic episode and exactly paranoid, running, end up in the hospital. I
Yep.
mean, it's bad. And they think, oh, it's natural. It's not going to happen to me. And
Yeah.
it's scary.
And
So,
parents, I know that, I mean, I do want to say, you know, like I recognize that I don't see, you know, I see the problems. So I understand that, you know, people want to argue with me all the time and say that, you know, it's not that bad for some people. And, you know, maybe it's not. But what we certainly know it's not good for brains under the age of 25 that are still rapidly developing. They have a higher potential of addiction. That's why I keep emphasizing it's not really just teens, it's up to 25 that it's more addictive and more dangerous. And it's just, you know, if you're looking for my actual advice, my advice would be to stay away from it.
well, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Joe. We need to know these things. We need to be educated. We need to educate our kids. And what a wonderful way to do it to have written this book. And so that we can give it to our kids so that we can read it ourselves and gift it and stick those $20 bills in the book.
Can be fives. You know, you could run out of money quickly if you're marking everything here. But yeah.
And it can give us greater peace knowing that, we're having these hard conversations, but we're also equipping them with, this book when they go to college. And if they're having something like an ear infection, they're not sure, they can flip to that chapter, strep throat. I mean, you cover
appendicitis, kidney stones. I mean, we, aside from all
appendicitis,
other things, you know, we have concussions and sprained ankles and all those things. And I try and give little tips, like just as an example, the appendicitis one is the easiest one. People get so worried when they have really bad stomach pain, and nothing is 100% in medicine, but I will tell you that it's very, 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 very rare to be hungry and have appendicitis. So for a lot of people, that ends up being a little bit reassuring at 2 a.m. when they're hungry, but they were having stomach pains. It's much more likely they've got a gastritis or a stomach bug or whatever.
Yeah, those are those great tips and tricks that you have in the book. So we'll have to do like an Instagram or something on there where you can give us these tips and tricks.
Sure.
Yeah, so because there's so much. So anyway, tell them where to find you and where to buy the book. You had mentioned Amazon. Again, you want the blue and gold version.
Yes, you want the blue and gold version. Check the publishing date. The blue and gold is the new one. The maroon one is the old one, but just only remember one thing. Remember, blue and gold is the new one. It has more in it. I mean, if they mark the other one to sale for $5, get that. Heck, I would. But you want all the new information. And also please support your local bookstores. I love indie bookstores, and I always encourage people to go there first. But the reality is, we all use Amazon to some extent, I think. Most of us do. So it is there as well. And I am on social media on Instagram as Jill Grimes, MD. And I am the TikTok college doc. And I am kind of migrating. I don't know, who knows how long or if TikTok's going to last. I won't go there, whatever. I'm just there to give information. And, but I'm also slowly migrating to YouTube, and I'll just be the college doc.
Okay, wonderful. And then your website
is Jill Grimes, MD.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for writing this book. And I always love talking to you.
Oh, it was so much fun talking with you. And I am always available for your group.